Welcome to Sports Love Media on YouTube. Tonight's broadcast is part one of a two-part series called The Road to the National Championships. And tonight we will focus on part one, which will be the women's edition of that. The National Championship game has been set, and we will go over that and the details leading to the road to the National Championship. Before I get into that, please hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button, please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of when I am going live or when I have any new sports video action that goes out. So without further ado, let's get into this, shall we? The national championship game, which is going to be held Sunday, March 2nd, will be featuring Louisiana State University, or LSU, versus Iowa. So, with that being said, those two teams are playing for the national championship. So, let's look and see how they actually got to this game. We'll start with LSU. On November 7th, they played Bellarmine and won that game 125-50. November 11th, they played Mississippi Valley State, won that game 111-41. November 13th, Western Carolina, they played and won 107-34. On November 16th, LSU played Houston Christian, won that game 101-47. November 20th, they played Northwestern State, won that game 100-45. On November 24th, they competed against George Mason, won that game 80-52. November 26th, they competed against UAB, won that game 99-64. November 29th, they played Southeast Louisiana, won that game 63-55. On December 4th, LSU competed against Tulane and won that game 85-72. They were supposed to play a game on December 11th versus New Orleans. That game ended up being canceled and was not played or rescheduled. December 14th, they played Lamar, beat them 88-42. December 17th, Montana State won that game 91-52. On December 18th, Oregon State, they played and won that game 87-55. On December 29th, they competed against, at the time, number 24 Arkansas, won that game 69-45. On January 1 of 2023, they competed against Vanderbilt, won that game 88-63. On January 5th, they competed against Texas A&M, won that game 74-34. On January 8th, Kentucky, they won that game 67-48. January 12th, Missouri, won that game 77-57. January 15th, Auburn, won that game 84-54. On January 19th, they competed against Arkansas, won that game 79-76. On January 23rd, they competed against the University of Alabama, won that game 89-51. On January 30th, they competed against Tennessee, won that game 76-68. On February 2nd, they competed against Georgia, won that game 82-77 in overtime. February 5th, they competed against Texas A&M, won that game 72-66. LSU's first loss of the season came on February 12th when they competed against the number one team in the country, South Carolina, and they lost that game 88-64. On February 16th, they competed against Ole Miss and won that game 69-60. On February 19th, they competed against Florida, won that game 90-79. On February 23rd, they competed against Vanderbilt, won that game 82-63. February 26th, Mississippi State, they played and won that game 74-59. LSU was the number 2 seed in the Southeastern Conference tournament, and that tournament was played March 3rd through 5th. They first played Georgia and won that game 83-66 in the quarterfinals. In the semifinals, they played Tennessee and they lost that game 69-67. Selection Sunday rolls around on March 12th, and LSU is placed as a number 3 seed for the NCAA tournament. from there, they played Hawaii and won that game 73-50. On March 19th, they played Michigan, won that game 66-42. On March 24th, they competed against Utah, won that game 66-63. On March 26th, they played Miami, won that game 54-42. And then tonight, they played against Virginia Tech and won that game 79-72. Before I get into the details of the championship game, let's go forward with Iowa and see how they've done to lead to the national championship game. For Iowa, on November 7th, they played Southern, won that game 87-34. On November 10th of 2022, they played Evansville, won that game 115-62. On November 13th, they competed against Drake, won that game 92-86 in overtime. November 17th, they competed against Kansas State, lost that game 84-83. November 20th, they competed against Belmont, won that game 73-62. November 27th, they competed against, at that time, number 3, UConn, or the University of Connecticut, lost that game 86-79. On December 1st, they competed against then number 12 NC State or North Carolina State, lost that game 94-81. On December 4th, they competed against Wisconsin, won that game 102-71. December 7th, they competed against, at that time, number 10 Iowa State, won that game 70-57. December 10th, they played Minnesota, won that game 87-64. On December 18th, they played Northern Iowa, won that game 88-79. Then on December 21st, they played Dartmouth, won that game 92-54. On December 29th, they played Purdue, won that game 83-68. On January 1st of 2023, they played Illinois, lost that game 90-86. On January 7th, they competed against, at that time, number 14, Michigan, won that game 94-85. On January 11th, they competed against Northwestern, won that game 93-64. On January 14th, Iowa competed against Penn State, won that game 108-67. On January 18th, they competed against Michigan State, won that game 84-81 in overtime. On January 23rd, they competed against number 2 in the country at the time, Ohio State, won that game 83-72. On January 28th, they competed against Nebraska, won that game in a close matchup, 80-76. On February 2nd, they competed against then number 8 Maryland and won that game 96-82. February 5th, they played Penn State, won that game 95-51. On February 9th, Iowa played, at the time, number 2 Indiana, lost that game 87-78. On February 12th, they played Rutgers, won that game 111-57. On February 15th, they played Wisconsin and won that game 91-61. February 18th, they competed against Nebraska, won that game 80-60. On February 21st, they competed against, at that time, number 7, Maryland, and lost that game 96-68. On February 26th, they competed against, at the time, number 2, Indiana, and won that game 86-85. Iowa then went to their conference tournament and won 3 games and won the conference championships. They played Purdue on March 3rd, won that game 69-58. They competed and played Maryland, won that game 89-84. And then on March 5th, which rounded out the end of their conference tournament, they played Ohio State and won that game 105-72. Selection Sunday rolls around on March 12th, and they were selected overall as a number 9 seed. So with that, in the games they played on March 17th, Southeast Louisiana won that game 95-43. On March 19th, they played the University of Georgia, won that game 74-66. On March 24th, they played Colorado, won that game 87-77. On March 26th, they played Louisville, won that game 97-83. And then tonight, to finish out the Final Four and get them into the national championship game, they played South Carolina and won that game 77-73. The women's college national championships for college basketball will be on April 2nd, and it will be LSU versus Iowa. The game will be played on the ABC network, and I believe tip-off will be 2:30 p.m. The game will be played in Dallas, Texas, at the Dallas American Airlines Center. So, for more information regarding how individuals played tonight or regarding how Iowa did, you can go to any of your sports websites like ESPN or anything like that and get more information on that. So there you have it, folks. That is the road to the national championships for the women's edition, part 1. Part 2 will be coming sometime tomorrow. We'll do the same thing, focusing on the men and who goes and who doesn't and all that wonderful stuff. Please hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button, and please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of when I'm going live or when I have any new sports action videos. In the meantime, I hope y'all all have a great night. Peace out.